With me now in the studio, Maddy Thimont, senior researcher at the Institute for Government's Brexit team, can explain everything that's going on this morning. Thank you very much for joining us, Maddy. So that debate is underway. I mean, they've not got very long to debate it, and actually, is it going to have any impact on what the government wants to do?
Yeah, exactly. So what they're debating is the bill, the legislation that's going to implement the withdrawal agreement into domestic law. And once that bill has become law, then the government can ratify the agreement and the UK can leave the EU. So, I mean, we've actually seen from that debate, a lot of it has been about actually the future relationship with the EU. That's what they're discussing a lot of right now. And actually that's sort of still to come. That negotiation is still to come. But in terms of the debate this morning, the vote today, now that Boris Johnson has his majority in Parliament, we can assume that it will pass, the bill will go through. MPs will then be voting on the timetable for the rest of the passage of the legislation. Again, expect that to go through. So really, there aren't any obstacles now in the government's way in terms of taking the UK out of the EU.
How much has changed in the bill that's going forward now compared with the bill that came forward in October?
So it is quite interesting. There have been some changes. I think there is sort of three key ones that a lot of people have focused on. I mean, the first one is that previously there was a reference to workers' rights and saying that the government would make a statement when they might be changing workers' rights in the future. And that was really a concession to try and get some Labour MPs on board to support the bill. They've removed that provision. And I mean, it's worth saying that what they did have wasn't that strong, but it does show now they don't need to worry about those Labour MPs. They've got a majority. The second is that they've now said that they definitely will not be extending transition period. So when we leave the EU, there's still a period where we basically follow all EU rules so that nothing changes while the government negotiates. And that will end in December 2020. And the government have now committed in law to say that they will not be extending that period. It's worth saying you can still change that with a majority in government. You could change that law, but it's clearly another political intent, signal of political intent to both a domestic audience, so to the UK, but also to the EU.
Sorry. I mean, how can these changes be happening to the withdrawal agreement here when it's obviously an agreement that was drawn up in conjunction with the EU member states?
So it's not changing the withdrawal agreement, it's just changing how we're implementing it. So in terms of that commitment I just mentioned about not extending transition period, the withdrawal agreement still says that you can do it. It's just that the government have now said in their own law that they won't do it. So it's the sort of tension is really what this legislation does is it implements the deal in domestic law. It doesn't change the actual treaty agreed with the EU. And I think just the final thing I want to say is that the other very key difference with this bill, and I think this is the most important, is that previously there was a role for Parliament in the next phase. They would vote on the negotiating objectives, but also on the final treaty. And the government has completely removed that. So next year, Parliament's going to have not really much of a say at all. So we're looking at a very different year to this one, where actually, a lot of the drama has been in Parliament. Parliament has had a very significant role in terms of looking for an extension to Article 50 and rejecting the deal, whereas next year there won't be an opportunity for Parliament to do that.
Yeah, we're getting to grips with really changed political times, as you say, compared with what was going on over the past few years. In terms of what happens next, the departure date is the 31st of January, so this needs to get through the various stages. What will happen on the 31st of January? Will there be anything palpable in terms of a change at that point?
I think not really. I mean, it's where, as I said, we'll be going into a transition period where essentially, I mean, the UK will no longer be an EU member state. That is a difference, and we will no longer be in EU institutions. But in terms of sort of real change for people, you're not going to really see anything. The bigger change will likely come if the government does successfully negotiate a future relationship over the next year, will be at the end of December 2020. So the 1st of January 2021 is where we're more likely to see real change.